I think probably my first monster memories kind of coincide with my first memory of the Beatles, because my dad loved monsters, and he was sort of a pop culture kind of guy. He loved pop culture. So I remember around the same time he woke us up and said, "Kids, come in, look at what's on TV." It was the Ed Sullivan Show and the Beatles, and being half awake and watching the Beatles. Wow, first time in America. Then the other memory, not so great maybe, was, "Kids, come look at this," and it was so sweet. Charlotte with Betty Davis as the bride, who's on her wedding night. The husband's head, decapitated head, hits her and she comes in stumbling into the wedding party with her husband's blood all over her dress. And then he also did it with Jason and the Argonauts. So that was the one that really, in my mind went click when I was standing there, because it was 9:30 at night and it was the first network screening on CBS, whatever it was, Monday Night Movies or whatever. And I had kindergarten the next day, but there I was, awake at 9:30 and watching the skeletons grow from the ground, and the guy spreading the teeth of the Hydra. What a bizarre concept that take the monster teeth and they grow the skeletons of its victims. Mind-bending. On top of it, that the skeletons themselves were clearly not guys wearing suits. There was something else in play there that I didn't quite understand, but that really started a kind of a lifelong interest in how monsters were made. And fortunately, I had a dad who was very into it too, and he could explain a fair amount. He couldn't explain to me why the guy who threw the Hydra's teeth was wearing a miniskirt, though. That was another thing that scarred me, because that guy did not have the legs for it. It was the summer when I was 13 years old, when I was in Boston visiting my uncle, and they had an outdoor newsstand, and there was a magazine called Castle of Frankenstein, and they had a couple of back issues, and there were 2 issues, and both of them had two of my favorite monsters on them. They had, I think, Talos and maybe something else, the Hydra or something like that. But I had no idea who Ray Harryhausen was at the time. But I bought those magazines and I started reading them, and I realized, page after page, my favorite monsters were on this page, and they were the work of one guy. And then it clicked in my head that people do this for a living. People make monsters, all my favorite stuff, the greatest moments that I've had in theaters were the responsibility of a single artist. So it made me stop and look at movies a little bit differently. The closest that anybody came to being a naysayer was Mr. Stotts in high school. He was the guidance counselor, and he everybody has to go in before you graduate and tell Mr. Stotts what you want to be when you grow up, what your plan is for after high school. And I said, "I want to do stop motion animation." And he looked at me blankly and said, "How about welding? You want to be a welder? Does it involve welding?" And I was like, no, Mr. Stotts, it's like in the tradition of, Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen. He says, "Welding pays $12 an hour." And so he broke out the book about the welding, and I realized, okay, I got to listen to the guy. And in retrospect, I kind of wish I could weld, because it would come in pretty handy. But so I don't want to dog Mr. Stotts too much. He was looking out for everybody. But I never really had anybody telling me I couldn't do it. It was such an odd thing to be interested in special effects and movies that most people just didn't know how to respond, let alone to respond negatively. I didn't really start getting serious about school. I was always a decent student, but I didn't start getting serious about school until I decided I wanted to go to film school. So probably about halfway through my junior year, I started, getting better grades and so on, and trying to build a portfolio that I could submit to a school. I applied to USC, to the film school. I didn't get into the film school, but I got accepted to the art school at USC. But because I was sort of single-minded, I thought that was a great insult. That they didn't accept me to the film school. I didn't realize that, I don't know if anybody got in as an undergraduate. So I kind of went, screw that, and I went to 2 years of community college. I went to 2 different community colleges in the area that offered film schools, filmmaking classes. While I was in my second year, wait a minute, no, what year was it? I think it was about 19, when I was 19. I met through an art teacher at my old high school, I met James Cameron. And her husband had taught him oceanography at Cal State Fullerton or something. He was about 25, I think I was 19 or so. And she said, oh, you got to meet this guy. He does what you do. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. He putters around in his mother's garage. I would call him on the phone, and I'm like, yeah. He said, come see this film that I made. You know, a friend of mine is going to show it at a theater out in Pomona after, you know, hours. He's the projectionist there. So I showed up at, like, you know, whatever, midnight or 1 o'clock after the midnight show, and sat down, and they showed this this short film called Xenogenesis. I saw this movie, 35 millimeter print. And it has a whole bunch of Cameronisms in it. You know, it's got an alien robot that looks very much like the tanks from the first Terminator. And it was meant to promote a film called Xenogenesis that he never got off the ground, but he had a script for it, and he had a ton of artwork for it. He had models built, he had paintings and all that stuff, and I'm like, this guy is way beyond where I am portfolio-wise. So right around the same time, my sister was working with a guy who worked for Roger Corman, and they were doing a sci-fi movie called Battle Beyond the Stars, and they offered me an interview, because this guy saw my mom's garage and saw my masks and my little stop-motion models and my sets and all that kind of stuff. Well, you should come on up, you know, you're a nice guy, you should come. And I said, okay, can I bring a friend? Which was Cameron, because I thought that guy's portfolio is way better than mine. I'll stand a better chance of getting hired if I drag him along. So we went up there. We both had kind of different motives. You know, my motives was just to get a job in the industry. His was to take over the industry. But it was a lot of fun, because when we started working together, which was about 9 months after that initial interview, I was assisting him. So we would drive up from Orange County. You know, whatever project he would start, he would sort of be climbing the ladder, so he would leave that project half finished, and I'd finish it up and then join him on the next rung of the ladder. So I got to do a ton of things. It was a better film school than I could have ever paid for. You know, I got to do model building, I got to do creature design, building sets, I learned motion control. I was loading 35 millimeter cameras. You know, it was a great experience, and I also met guys like Robert and Dennis Skotak, Gail Ann Hurd, and other people that I still have relationships with today. So through my college years, which was when I was working for Roger Corman, you know, I would go back to school, and then I would go back and work on various Roger Corman movies like Android and Forbidden Planet, and you know, I got to meet a lot of people, but always I was interested in makeup and monsters, and there was a little less of that going on at Corman than I wanted to, or like guys like Rick Stratton would get the job to make a monster, you know, names in the business now. And it was all valuable experience, but I was kind of anxious to really start working around, and my buddy Pat McClung, who had worked on the Star Wars movies, was more of a model builder, and I'd get in to see, you know, guys over at Boss Films, and you know, I got to see Blade Runner, you know, all the model work on Blade Runner while I was in college, and I would just drool over all that great stuff, but I didn't really have the technical skills to build models, so I wasn't really hireable by a model shop. I got to meet Steve Johnson during that period. He was on Ghostbusters, and I got to walk through and look at all the transformation, the librarian transformation, and I was just like blown away by all that stuff. And as you can imagine, it was just it was a great time for the development of animatronics and makeup as well. So once I finished school, I just started pounding the pavement and looking for work. I landed a job with Greg Canham on Friday the 13th, Part 4, and we were going to be the first ones to really kill Jason. So I was designing that effect, and you know, working with Kevin Yeager and James Cagle and John Vulich, who later opened Optic Nerve, and you know, so a lot of great people. I was very excited to be working with Greg Canham. I had done some little jobs with him earlier, but I then got a call at that time from Stan Winston, because Jim Cameron's movie was off the ground, and it was Terminator, right? And Jim had said, you know, some time prior, he told me that he wanted me to do the stop motion on this movie, that he was, you know, a script he was writing at the time, right? I was like, okay, whatever, you know, good luck with that. It sounds kind of dumb to me, you know. And then, of course, it turns out to be Terminator. So, but I got the call from Stan, and I was like, I can't, I'm committed to a film, you know, Friday the 13th, you know, and I'm working for Greg Canham, and so Stan, I said, but could I come show you my portfolio? So I grabbed my stuff and I went up to Northridge, you know, from Mar Vista to Northridge, you know, where the temperature goes higher as you come over the Sepulveda Pass. And I met with Stan, and I remember he was very, he wasn't curt, but he was very efficient. And, you know, I learned this from him, actually. When I look at portfolios now, I take the book from the person and I turn the pages, because generally speaking, people have put a lot of work into their portfolios and they're very proud of what they do. And so they tend to go like, and this is crepe hair. And I don't know if you've worked with crepe hair or not, but, you know, and you know, so Stan took my book and it was like, vip, 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 and, you know, it was only like 10 pages long, and he just went through it like that, and I thought, this is not going well, you know, and he said, okay, great. Well, thanks for coming in. Sorry, we can't have it, but Cameron says good things about you. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Well, you know, and then as I was leaving, I was like, can I call you again? Can I, you know, and I could, bam, you know. So I thought, all right, well, maybe not. I went back to work on Friday the 13th, and then Greg Canham left that show, and Tom Savini came in. And Tom Savini was a very controversial character, of course, because even though he was a very accomplished and popular makeup artist, on the West Coast, people kind of poo-pooed him, right? They kind of said like, oh, it's gore, gore is easy, blah, 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 blah. You know, he had done Creep Show and done some things. And I admit, and I've admitted this to Tom in the past, that I unfairly judged him in that way as well. And I talked to him on the phone a couple times when he was like coming out, and, you know, he's a real soft-spoken guy. Okay, I'm gonna be out next week, and I just a couple of questions. Can you get acetone there? And I'm like, yeah, we can get 5-gallon buckets of it. All right, okay. What about RTV, which is silicone? And so I said, yes, we can get that in 5-gallon buckets too. Oh, okay, all right, well, that's good then, I suppose. So he showed up, and he was very nervous because he had only worked back east, and now he, unbeknownst to us, he felt a lot of anxiety because he was coming to Hollywood to work, and he was like worried that everybody thought that he was a hack or that he didn't have the chops and all that stuff. But the great thing about Tom, once you get to know him, is that he's got such a fun personality that, first of all, he's just a nice guy, and you can laugh with him and hang out with him. But secondly, when you really look at his career, he is totally self-taught. And as he says it, he says he always wanted to work in Hollywood, but he was lucky Hollywood came to him because of his connection to Romero in Pittsburgh. So he came up with alternative approaches and techniques and materials that were really quite ingenious. And sometimes it may not have been as refined as what big budgets in Hollywood would allow, but it really kind of turned my thinking to not be afraid to be the guy who does something kind of kooky or what other people think is unconventional, because that's where some of the greatest discoveries come from. Some great new techniques can come out of that. I mean, I know one of the things that he did that I was very impressed with was with squibs. He had no, you know, what is he going to use for a battery? So he used Polaroid film cartridges, actually had tiny little batteries in them. So he would use a Polaroid film cartridge to set off his squibs. And he was doing squibs himself, you know. He was not like he was a licensed pyrotechnician or anything like that. So Tom Savini was a great experience for me, and it was good to have that experience of working for Greg Canham, who was kind of on the other end of the spectrum in terms of being an established Hollywood guy who came out of the Rick Baker school, you know, and Tom Savini, who was sort of the cowboy inventor type. And then when I finally had my opportunity to go back to Stan and for the next project, I was in better standing. I had, for a brief period of time after Friday the 13th, I was kind of like a staffer at a place called Real Effects, where we were, you know, ostensibly doing makeup effects and creatures, et cetera. They are the guys that did Mac and Me. So for like about, you know, 12 minutes there, I thought that I was going to be in charge of an animatronics department, but it didn't quite pan out. So I was very happy to reconnect with Stan right around, it was before Aliens, but it was around the time of Invaders from Mars. And actually, specifically, it was a TV pilot called Steel Collar Man that Dave Thomas from SCTV had developed, and Charles Rocket was starring as a kind of an android, comedy android detective guy or something like that. So Steel Collar Man was my first experience with Stan, and then that segued into Invaders from Mars, and we were doing outrageous giant things, and so I was in heaven getting to work with, that's where I met Tom Woodruff, Shane Mahan, John Rosengrant, Richard Landon. I brought Kevin Yeager in to meet Stan, and Kevin worked there for just a couple of weeks. And then he got Nightmare on Elm Street 2, I think, and he ran off to start his own shop. But it was a fun time to be there with all these young guys, being led by Stan, led by a guy who was very capable and very respected in the business, and would just give you opportunities, and I had the stamp of approval from Cameron. So that went a long way with Stan. So I felt like I was welcomed after a long time of sort of drifting, bouncing around, looking for a home basically to where you could start improving your skills and applying all this stuff that I knew and, show my talents and all that stuff. To be able to land at Stan's was a dream come true. And he gave us all more opportunities than we ever imagined, and that's partly because the movies were coming hand over fist. It went from Invaders from Mars to Aliens, which was an adventure unto itself, to be able to go to London and work for months and have a movie like that come out, and then have Predator and Alien Nation, Leviathan. I was only there for 2.5 years. People are always like, what? That only 2.5 years? And I'm like, yeah, but 2.5 Stan Winston years was like 7 years for anybody else, because he was just going. And you say we were just running at a breakneck pace and learning a lot, and it was a great time. And I, of course, one of the best experiences that I had there was Pumpkinhead, seeing him get to direct his first feature, and how happy he was and what a goofball he was on set. And again, that opened my eyes, because you have kind of preconceptions of what a director is like, because you see all the pictures of the guys, like this, and you think, But here was Stan, who was just, his motto was, I'm going to have more fun than anybody, and if this isn't a fun set, then what are we doing, So the work was getting done, and it all looked great, but Stan would always, you could always count on Stan to lighten the anxiety in the room. I remember looking over, I assisted Shane on his witch makeup of Haggis the Witch, right? Which I thought Shane did a great job on that, and I was, applying with him. And so we get her in there, and there's a fire. We didn't realize this fire is just gigantic, this gas fireplace. So all the KY that we would put on her would just go, and it would just like dry up like that. So we're constantly going in and spritzing, and there was tension there, and I remember looking over at Stan, and he was just standing all the way across the cabin set with his trademark glasses like this, going with the glasses at an angle, and I laughed, and I thought, all right, okay, the boss is happy, so maybe I can lighten up a little bit and try to have as much fun as he's having. But part of, in a funny way, as a management technique, when you see the boss like that, you think, oh, somebody's got to be serious. I better take my job a little more serious, and you try harder. You have fun, but you know that there's always a safety net. Stan is not going to come over and tear you a new one because you're cracking a joke, right? He encouraged that, and that was always one of the great things about working with him on set. And I remember watching him as he directed Second Unit on Aliens, and just watching him just get more and more tired. He was just so drawn, and he would trudge. But when you'd see him, like if he didn't know anybody was watching, it just looked like he was in a labor camp, which kind of it was on that movie, just a little bit. But then he'd see you, and he'd brighten up, and he'd say, "How you doing? You holding up okay?" And then you realize, well, God, if he's saying that under the pressure he's under, then yeah, I guess I'm fine. I'm good. But I also learned that on set he he counted on us, but he also would sort of tend to ignore us because, you know, he's very hands-on, right? So I remember him working on the queen face, and he was doing something, putting the tendons back on. We had to super glue them back on because they're condoms and stuff. And I would say, Stan, excuse me, Stan, and no response. He'd just be, but if I said his name in an English accent, he would assume that it was somebody, you know, another department head. So I would say, Stan, and he'd go, yes, and he'd turn around and he'd look right through me. Like, I'd be like right here, you know. I said, that was me, okay? I just need to ask a question. But it was very funny like that. And it was never rudeness. It was just simply that he was focused on that one thing. But you'd sometimes, plus we were like 25 years old, you know, who's paying attention to any of us children anyway? You know, Stan used to say that. He said, he'd self-effacingly say, I'm in charge because I've got the gray hair. But of course it was much more than that. But anyway, so my Stan experiences were great, and you know, they really were the biggest foundation I have for my professional life. You know, both in terms of accumulating credits as well as experience. Because when you see a resume, you know, and you see a credit on somebody's resume, it's like you don't know exactly what that means. That could be, you know, a week of their life, or it could be 6 months of their life, and lots of responsibility. It really doesn't have a lot of meaning. But with the experience that I gained at Stan's, I was able to leave Stan's with a much richer, deeper, greater ability than when I went there. And he used to say that, you know, he'd say, the things that make you valuable are the things that are going to take you away from me eventually. Which may have been his very subtle way of saying, get the hell out. But I took some time off to go work for Kevin Yeager, my buddy Kevin, on Trick or Treat at Wilmington at the De Laurentiis Studios. And then, you know, when I came back, I thought maybe it's time for me to step out, you know, give Stan breathing room. I had a script that I'd written with Tom Woodruff that was getting some interest, and so naively we kind of thought, you know, well, maybe we're writers, and maybe what we're going to do is we're going to create projects that we bring back to Stan Winston Studio, you know? Maybe that's what and then we sort of got out there and chased our tails for you know, 6 months or so, and then realized, what have we done? Because nothing happened with that script. So basically we joked that ADI was founded on failure, because it's like, we got nowhere else to go, I guess we better. But what was perfect about the timing was it was all with Stan's blessings, you know, and he actually was referring jobs to us, you know. And he used to say, make no mistake, I will always do the job if I can. But if I can't, I'll send it your way. And he did do that, and it helped us out a lot. Our first feature film as ADI was Tremors, and that was one that old connections, Galen Hurd, who I had worked with at Roger Corman's, and then also Tom worked with her on The Terminator, and we both worked with her on Aliens. She sent the team to us and said, you know, you can talk to other people, but you're going to want to hire these guys, and so that was a very nice endorsement. We got that job, and it was kind of, it felt like a perfect follow-up to the kinds of things we had done at Stan Winston's. We recommended that the Skotak brothers be brought in to do miniature worms, you know, to approach it that way as opposed to us building full-scale worms that, you know, we really didn't have the technology to build full-scale hydraulics at the time and didn't want to try that out in the desert on a low-budget, you know, kind of, you know, hit the ground running kind of movie. So we built the full-scale stuff in very hands-on kind of manipulations. But it was a grueling project in that we were always outdoors, and we were always outdoors in the desert, you know, and we were literally digging pits to bury creatures in, and you would if you were puppeteering, you were inside a hole in the ground that had, you know, constantly had dirt, you know, so we were all wearing respirators, and, you know, it was like being in a mine. It was like being a miner, right? And I remember at one point we were out on the dry lake bed out there at Lone Pine, and we were digging with picks and shovels and stuff, and waiting for this this backhoe to arrive, because it was the scene when they unearth the dead worm, you know, and they kind of like the top, they've supposedly just dug it. So you just needed a top half of a worm, which sounds easy. In an office, when you're planning, you say, oh, yeah, we'll just build a top half of the worm, plunk it down, and sprinkle some dirt. It doesn't, not that easy. You got to dig down in to really make it look like, and then when you start piling shovels full of dirt on it, the foam completely collapses. So you have to like dig it back out, and then, you know, so we had bandanas on and sunglasses, and we both stopped. You know, sandstorm, in the middle of a sandstorm. We said, this is why we got into this? This is why we took the Dick Smith makeup course, you know? What? And so that was kind of how the show went. But it was one of those things where just by the sheer, by our sheer labor and sweat, we pulled it off, as did the entire team, and it became a cult classic. You know, never much box office success, but it became a cult classic, and one of the ones that even now people still point to when they see the drummer's worm on our wall. They go, I love that movie, you know. So that was a nice way to kick it off, and then we were 7 months out of work. After that, you know, it's nothing. Nobody would hire us. It was like we were dying on the vine, you know, brand new company, had a nice little success there, and then literally dying on the vine until Alien 3 came along. I believe that at the time of Alien 3, I think Stan was busy. I think maybe he was starting Terminator 2 or something like that. Or it may have been a kind of been there, done that sort of thing for him. But we were very enthusiastic. So I know that Stan said good things about us, and we got that job and shipped off to London again. So we were there like literally, I believe it was 5 years after Aliens. We were back again, this time as the bosses, right? But we were still very young. When I look back at the old footage of ourselves, I can't believe anybody hired us or put us in charge of anything. And no wonder all those old, experienced English department heads looked askance at us, because we just looked like kids, you know? Even though we were older than the director, David Fincher, we were baby-faced. The upshot of that movie, aside from meeting a lot of great people that we still have relationships to, the English crews were just fantastic. They're just extremely talented people, and you know, if you look at our crew, it's just a who's who of success stories, including, you know, Dave Elsey, who's an Oscar winner, David Anderson, American, who won a couple of Oscars, Chris Cunningham, who became, you know, a great video director, Paul Catling and Julian Calder are both production designers, Mark Coulier, another Oscar winner. So we had a fantastic crew, all guys about our age. So we had a blast, but it showed us the sort of challenges of being foreigners and running a show in a different country. But it did lead to an Oscar nomination in the same year that we were up against ourselves for Death Becomes Her. So after 7 months of no work, we got a job, and then we had another job, and then look at us at the end of that period, we've got 2 nominations in the same category. So in the Oscars, you're only allowed 4 names on the visual effects ticket, and it's based on, you know, who did what and what. In Alien 3, we did enough that both of us could get our names on the ticket. In Death Becomes Her, you know, we were more of a support team for ILM, so only one of us could get the name. So we tossed a coin, and that went to Tom. And no matter how many times I tossed that coin, it still came up Tom. Not a two-headed coin. I know what everybody's thinking, but that's not the case. So we did win for Death Becomes Her. Tom got up, did a great job with his acceptance speech, you know, amidst the throng of ILM guys who he had to kind of like claw his way to the front just to be able to stick his face at the into the microphone and say a few words. But he did a great job representing us on that. I would like to say, and after that, it was easy pickings, you know, clean sailing, but it wasn't really. You always have to compete, and you know, Stan used to say that no matter where you are in your career, you still have to compete. You have to compete with people who work out of their garages. You have to compete with you know, people from other countries. You know, other techniques now with the digital work now. You can never coast. It makes such a difference when you've got a good group of people that you can communicate with, and just as soon as you get that job, you either make the call if they're not working for you at the time, and they're there, or you know, you give them the specs and things get rolling. We have a really well-oiled machine, and I think that puts us ahead of the game in terms of schedule. We're able to do things at a high caliber and quality very quickly that, you know, if you were pulling a shop together, finding space, getting machinery, interviewing people, you know, it would be very difficult. You know, a lot of people ask, what's it like, you know, having a partner for this long? And of course, there's all the jokes about it being like a marriage, which it is. What it is I think there's always a sounding board, you know, because this is a very stressful business, and Tom and I tend to flip positions sometimes. Sometimes, you know, one of us is very passionate about something, and the other's like, well, wait a minute, you know, what if it's this way, you know? And if you didn't have that balance, I know for myself, I would probably be more reactionary. I would be less sort of down the middle and looking kind of long range, because you step back, you go, wait a minute, somebody I respect has a different point of view. This isn't just a dictatorship, right? This is a team. And remembering that, I think is a good thing, not only for the partnership, but also for the people who are working for us. And it is like a family in that respect, where, you know, sometimes people will do that, you know, they'll go to Tom and say, hey, I know Alec's not crazy about this idea, but because you shut down, you know, you start working with blinders on, and you stop receiving input. That can be great if you just need to accomplish a single focused goal, but really what we're doing is not necessarily always just trying to get that one goal, make that one creature. You know, there's a lot of ways to do things right, a lot of ways to do things economically, whether it's time or money-wise. So there's multiple approaches that one can take to get to a great result. And I just think that being able to, you know, keep your ears open and listen to the things being said around you is very important. And having a partner helps that, because you don't get quite so insulated, and you don't kind of, you know, close in to your own head. You're automatically forced to listen, you know, and that's a good thing. It also takes pressure off. You know, we're able to schedule time away from the shop, you know, because you know that you got the best guy is going to cover you, you know. I used to hear that when I was coming up through the ranks, you know, people saying, oh, don't ever get married, don't ever have a family, not in this business. And it was Stan was the very first one who said, of course you can, you know, you just have to be smart about it, you know, take care of yourself. You're the one that your family's counting on for a lot of the, you know, for sustenance and the roof over the head and all that stuff. So make sure you're good, but make sure you're giving them the time that they need, you know, be there for the family, all that stuff. Stan was the one who encouraged me to get married and have children, you know, and I'm so glad that I listened to that, because I was listening more to sort of the failures, the people who had not been able to make that work. And I do believe that it is possible, but you have to structure your business so that it supports that. And we try to do that with our people as well, you know. We try to be respectful when people say, like, I gotta, you know, attend my daughter's recital or something like that. That is sacrosanct, you know. You find a way to fill in the gap and cover for that person, you know. Very rarely is it ever just, you can't, you must cut yourself off from the family. I remember hearing those stories, you know, at shops where people would bring sleeping bags, and you know, the expectation was, you know, lock the doors and you're here for weeks on end, and we're like, screw that, you know, you're going to have a revolution, or you're going to have a drop off in quality. You're just not, people aren't going to be giving you their best if they're dead tired, if they're deprived of their own life. You know, then you're paying a lot of money for lesser work, and that doesn't make any sense either. In a business where you think of the, you know, the Rick Baker or the Dick Smith as the lone artist working under the bare bulb, and it's his vision, or Ray Harryhausen, you know, as I mentioned, Ray Harryhausen's work. Purity of vision is important, but I think that if you respect your team, you can get something maybe that's a little different than you expected, but is better than what you expected, and that's the joy of it. Is, you know, walking through a shop and being delighted by something that a sculptor does, or a painter, or a mold maker, or anybody says, hey, look at this. Or they sort of timidly say, I don't know what you're going to say. Or you're like, that is great. I never would have expected that. But as long as it falls within the parameters established by the director, the script, you know, then you should embrace those things and encourage them from people. You know, there's a line where that becomes less effective too. If it's a free-for-all and nobody's really, where's the ship steering, you know? We're the captains of the ship, but you need an able-bodied crew, you know, and you need their feedback, you know, because they're like looking at the dolphins swimming, and somebody's got to say, thar she blows, right? I don't think that's the captain, right? I think that's somebody else. The captain has to be like, okay, she's blowing over there, thar, so then you go over there. Where were we? I've been very encouraged by the response that we've gotten through the Stan Winston School of Character Arts, specifically the Facebook online presence. I think the outpouring of positive energy from fans of makeup and practical effects is so invigorating. I mean, it's what inspired us at ADI to do our Studio ADI YouTube channel, because sharing these things with people brings so much back to you. I just love reading the comments, you know, and people bring their own history into it, right? I remember when I first saw this movie or that movie, and when my dad used to take me, or my irresponsible uncle let us watch things we shouldn't watch, whatever it was. Prior to the internet, all of our gauge of how successful any of our work was box office, you know, or reading reviews, or you'd hear friends talk, or you'd overhear someone in a coffee shop or whatever. Now you get to hear it directly. People bind together as groups. And I think that is making a difference in terms of inspiring filmmakers. And a lot of them are filmmakers that are communicating through the school. And it's very encouraging for me, because we meet with a lot of young directors who come to us and they say they remember the feeling they got when they watched a movie that had a makeup or a creature, a practical thing in it, and they want that for their films. I think that's where our craft lives, it lives with the new generation of people. Obviously it's fun to walk down memory lane and look at all the old stuff, and you know, all the stuff that never dies. The Predator is a classic, you know, the Alien is a classic. Those things, they don't seem to get time worn like so many other pop culture creations. These creatures seem to have a life of their own, and for a long period of time. And that's wonderful. I do that myself, you know. I get lost on YouTube looking at clips of old movies and all obscure things from my own childhood. But I see it carrying forward into the next generation of filmmakers. Guys that are in their 20s, early 30s now, guys and gals that are that age, who come to us and say, I really want what you do. There's something about what you guys do, this craft, that inspires the imagination and feels real and tactile. And we're not curmudgeons by any means. We don't say no digital. We say, you know, find the overlap, find the way that this work can be improved by digital, and find a way that digital can be improved by the practical. And then you're free. You're totally free to approach it how you feel is right for your story. In terms of the long range and where the technique is going, obviously digital technique, I don't even like to think of it as digital versus practical, because I think that that's like saying hammer versus screwdriver, right? I mean, they're both in the toolbox, they're both there for the filmmaker to use. We do need to encourage an understanding of how to use the tools. If the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? And there's a lot of wisdom to that. So you have to understand that challenges, aesthetic decisions can be approached from many different angles. But what we like to do is we like to encourage young filmmakers to do what's right for their film, rather than being slaves to a technique, right? You know, if they come to us and they say, I want all practical, we say, you know, that's really not practical. It's not wise, perhaps, you know. Make your foundation practical where it makes sense, but then augment, etc. When I look at the history of stop motion, I'm a stop motion fan. I think that is a good indicator of of where our techniques are going. I mean, I mean, in that stop motion was something that was very big, right? I mean, it's, you know, whenever it started in 1903 or whatever, or then in 1925 you had The Lost World, you know, and then in 1933 you had King Kong, and then all through Ray Harryhausen's era, and all the way up Phil Tippett's work, you know, all the way. And it really wasn't until Jurassic Park that people started saying it's going to be replaced, right? Stop motion is dead, 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 dead. But then you have, well, there's Nightmare Before Christmas, and there's James and the Giant Peach, and there's Paranorman that just came out. Chicken Run, The Incredible Mr. Fox, which was an Oscar-nominated movie, was a stop-motion movie. The list of stop-motion movies that are still being done, it just goes on and on and on. And I think that's a healthy way to look at all practical effects, makeups, animatronics, etc. That there will always be room for them. There will always be a desire for them to be used. They may not be they're specialty techniques. I mean, you know, we say this when we give tours of ADI. You know, we don't do, one week we're not doing a tidal wave, and the next week we're doing giant spaceships. All we do is characters. We design characters, and we will design characters for digital purposes, characters that there's no practical version of at all. And that's fun. That has its rewards as well. But I think there will always be a place for the practical, and I think that part of what's keeping that alive is what's going on online now, with groups sort of sharing their love of this work. Because there's something about making something. There's something about a little thing that actually, you build it and you pull things, or you do, and it actually moves and it occupies real space. And we're finding that people are very interested in that in live exhibits as well. We've done a number of live exhibits where we're getting to build animatronics on a scale that we don't do much for movies anymore. We did a giant baby for the World's Fair, which was in Shanghai a couple of years ago. A Spanish company came to us and said they wanted a 20-foot tall animatronic baby. We built this baby that could look around the room, smile, fall asleep, breathe, giggle, and it was a fantastic project. The head alone weighed a ton. The face skin was 500 pounds of silicone. So it's everything we do on a small scale. We expanded it and did it on a larger scale. It was a blast. That would be the kind of job that you might have done for some reason, you know, back in the day. Obviously, you know, movies like Jurassic Park had that kind of scale. But people don't tend to do it for movies as much. But there is still the live experience that's very important. And, you know, shows like Walking with Dinosaurs obviously are taking the costume and robotic animatronic technology into that live action world where, you know, maybe they're a little bit more theatrically painted or theatrically textured or what have you, but the movement is all there and it's all happening before your eyes, and it's a spectacular experience to sit there and look at and have a brontosaurus neck, you know, reaching 30 feet out over the audience, and you know, it is really magical, and it cannot be replaced by some digital creation because you're sitting there looking at it, you know. Kids coming up now, or students coming up now wanting to get into animatronics or character creation, I would recommend that they keep their minds open to these live exhibits also. And I think when you go on YouTube and start looking at all the new advancements in robotics that right now are very high end, you know, two-legged, you know, Japanese robots that walk like people, et cetera, et cetera. But if you imagine in the future, that stuff's going to get cheaper, and somebody is going to say, hey, what if we take that framework and put that skin on it, and then we will have E.T. that can walk around and do all the things that a real character can do, and it'll really be there. And then, not only that, but we'll be able to walk that character down the red carpet of the film, and it'll be able to talk to the press and shake his hand. Those are the moments that I'm waiting for, and we just have to make sure that our people who are interested in this, new artists, don't just disappear into other techniques, and that there's nobody there to provide for when that day comes, because that's going to come very soon. When I think of just what we do every day, just walking through the world every day. We experience what we experience with all five senses. When you go to a movie theater, it's a pretty darn compelling imitation of that, but it's still an imitation. It's still, it's sight and it's sound. In the real world, with real live characters performing in front of you and for you, you are incorporating all five senses. You can potentially, and we've been contacted by people who would love to replace zoo animals with animatronics. We haven't gotten into smells yet of animals, or the real guttural sounds, or the reverb that you will feel in your chest when an animatronic elephant bellows this far away from you. When you touch that animal and you feel its bristly hair, that is where live performance characters will really shine. And that day is coming very soon. And I hope that we have our artists all ready to go, and that we don't have a desertion of the ranks, because that is going to be tremendously compelling, and that is something that digital work can never give you. I've always been kind of a private person in terms of my own creative vision and so on. I've got projects that I work on just, you know, sort of quietly. But when Matt Winston approached me about being a teacher here at the Stan Winston School of Character Arts, I thought, first of all, yes, because if I can keep his dad's legacy alive, if I can contribute to that, they don't need my help, but because the work stands for itself. But if I can contribute to that, to the ongoing interest in what Stan did and what Stan created, I feel good about that, because Stan helped to create me. But once I got into it, it actually became a different kind of, I don't want to say mission, because that makes it sound like there's some effort to it. It's one of the most fun things I've ever done. And it's the responses back from students and from fans of this work that make it so fun. In a weird way, it has kind of removed ego. Like, we have an industry of understandably very competitive people, I think healthy competition is a good thing, because everybody's out there to show how talented we are and how clever we are and all that kind of stuff. And when the other guy is doing it and you go, damn, Jordi Shell is designing something I never thought of, then you want to go off and you're inspired by that, and it feeds and fuels itself. But what the Stan Winston School has done is been to actually bring people together. I've been contacting people. You know, Steve Wang is a friend of mine, and I, you know, sent him an email saying, that was a really awesome lesson that you did, you know. And they'll send me notes, you know. I mean, for me, it's like if somebody says, hey, I really enjoyed you dumping out the contents of your pathetic sculpting kit, you know, and going through that. I love that stuff, you know, because that is my personality. I love seeing the personalities of other people displayed, and the level of craft too. I'm appreciating it more, because I'm seeing some things that I never imagined, you know, and people that I don't know. There's a lot of people in the business that I don't know. And when I go and I watch how, I don't even remember who the guy is who's painting eyeballs, but they're beautiful. They're beautiful little eyeballs. And I'm like, I didn't know who this guy was, but that's the best eyeball I've ever seen. So it's educational, and it's bringing people together. I just hope that we can, there can be some kind of, eventually some sort of, you know, physical gathering of everybody, including the fans, to have some kind of a you know, press the flesh kind of meeting, because I would love to walk around and just look at all the stuff that has been created in lessons for the school. And but I really feel like it's brought a lot of us together and reconnected with a lot of people that I've lost touch with. So it's been really healthy for me too. You get re-engaged, and I feel that when I look at the Facebook too. I feel the fans are definitely engaged, the students are engaged, but it's been a great boon to the instructors as well. So I'm just really thrilled about my involvement.